What's up everyone? Alex here. Did you know that there's a hidden story behind Queen's Blood?
I have to tell them. They all need to know the terrible truth about Queen's Blood.
If that got you interested, then this video will walk you through the fundamentals of Queen's Blood, beyond the tutorial that you've experienced, and point out several things that you'll want to pay attention to. My goal for this video is to provide you with the proper knowledge that'll give you the confidence to create your own unique strategies with the cards that you have at your disposal. But first, let's quickly go over how Queen's Blood is played.
Our goal is to spread awareness about the game's diplomatic potential. What do you say? Want to play and help me drum up interest?
Queen's Blood combines the positional gameplay of chess and the way you affect your surroundings in Othello with deck-building gameplay. The goal of Queen's Blood is to score the most points in two lanes by alternately playing cards with the highest point totals. This is complicated by the fact that each card has a minimum pawn cost, which limits where you can place them. Additionally, each card also has a pattern that determines how many pawns it'll add to each tile. So in this case, since the Cactuar was placed here and their pattern is X-shaped, this card added one pawn in both of these tiles. And since I played Leverkron in this position in my next turn, thanks to its pattern, it added another pawn into this tile right here. You can even capture an enemy's pawn simply by making sure that your card's pattern overlaps your opponent's pawn. The game is then played until the entire board is filled, which actually goes by pretty fast, and the points are tabulated and the winner declared. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's expand upon that by talking about what cards you'll want to include in your deck, which is actually the most important part of the game. This is usually the biggest challenge for me in any card game, but thankfully, Queen's Blood is a bit more straightforward than others. Moving forward, I will be describing the white tile on each card's pattern as the base tile, and will be alternately calling pawns and ranks as one or the other. Before anything else, I want to spend some time to clarify how pawn tiles and the pawn costs for each card relate to each other. While most collectible card games require you to spend currency to play a card, it's better to shift your line of thinking from cards having a cost to that of each tile having different ranks designated by the number of pawns, like what Queen's Blood's tutorial suggests. That's because placing your pawns in as many tiles as possible on the board is the key to winning Queen's Blood. That said, the number of pawns on a tile indicates its rank rather than a minimum cost. This is an important distinction because this means that on any rank 2 tile, you are allowed to play cards with not only 2 ranks, but also 1 rank as well. This also means that you can play any card on any rank 3 tile, so keep this in mind while you're building your deck. Your goal when building your deck is to ensure that the cards you've chosen allow you to place a ton of pawns on the board for the lowest cost, always making sure that you're expanding your pawns towards the right side of the board. This is to ensure that you can cover most of the board with your cards. Generally speaking, a low-ranking card with a ton of pawns in its pattern is something that you'll want to keep an eye out for, especially if most of its pawns are towards the right side of the base tile. And perhaps the most important of all is not to forget to consider card diversity in relation to each card's ranks. Another thing that I want to point out is that patterns on each card are shown on a 5x5 grid, even though the Queen's Blood board is only 5x3. This means that certain cards might be better suited for specific lanes. For example, this card shown has pawns at the top and bottom, skipping a lane above and below the base line. This means that placing this card in the middle does absolutely nothing, since the pawns appear outside of the board. That said, placing this card on either the topmost or bottommost row will place a pawn on either the bottommost or topmost row respectively. Considering your pawn placements vertically, as well as to the far left and right, is a good advanced strategy, especially if you want to be sneaky and take over tiles that are hard to reach. More advanced cards will have this type of tile, in addition to other properties. These are effect tiles. Effect tiles do not leave a pawn when the card is played. Rather, these tiles only activate upon fulfilling certain requirements on the card. When choosing which cards to add to your deck, pay attention to patterns and that card's score. For example, there are a few L-shaped beginner patterns that have equivalencies that either have a higher score or have unique properties. If the card's properties don't have detrimental effects, I highly recommend using these and/or higher scoring versions of these patterns in your deck. The last consideration I want to bring up is that you only have 15 cards to add to your deck. This means that you'll only play at least 8 cards during a match. Counting the other 4 left in your hand, that means that there's a high likelihood that you won't ever get to see 3 cards if the match ends after 15 cards are played between yourself and your opponent. This is important to consider because you'll want to make sure that you have a wide variety of options to move around the board, even if you don't see the other 3 cards. This is also something you'll need to think about when you start a match and you're asked to discard a certain amount of cards. To recap, when thinking of cards to add to your deck, think of its rank, its score, and how its pattern is going to help you take over more tiles on the board. Also, consider cards that can allow you to capture tiles in non-traditional ways, like either diagonally and vertically. And when you're comfortable with all of this, start expanding your repertoire by incorporating cards with different effects, even ones that may allow you to capture tiles beyond enemy lines. When it comes to the match itself, the best way to look at the board is that of 3 different lanes: the top, middle, and the bottom. The idea is similar to MOBAs in that you'll want to keep pushing your pawns further towards your opponent's side to gain the advantage, and you do that by placing your cards in strategic points to either fortify a lane position or capture your opponent's pawns. The strategy shifts depending on your opponent's cards, so you will have to study the way that they behave during the match to determine the kind of strategy you'll employ. That said, I don't recommend retrying a match repeatedly after a couple or so defeats. This usually means that you'll need to reconsider what cards you'll have on your deck to defeat your opponent. So go back to your deck and edit it and see if a different approach will work. And if for some reason you're still unable to defeat your opponent, then make sure you've purchased every single booster pack from the item shops, as well as challenge other players in the world. That usually means advancing the main story, which you should be doing anyway. But you'll notice that even high-ranking players don't necessarily mean that they're unstoppable, and they might even fall to one of your established strategies fairly easily. All that said, I hope this brief video gave you some really good ideas on how to tackle Queen's Blood. And if there's any questions that I can help answer, please don't hesitate to post them and your strategies in the comments below so we can talk about it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.